Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Marchuk, and welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Our guest on this episode is Malcom. Malcom is the head of data strategy at Profisee and has worked within several high-profile companies over his career, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. We're going to talk with him today about his expertise in driving value through the data that all organizations seem to be awash in. So welcome, Malcom.
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm glad you are here. So obviously, my little intro didn't do justice. So give us a little more about your background and how you came about this passion for this whole data-driven organization.
Absolutely. I'm the head of data strategy for Profisee. My role is really evangelism. Previous to Profisee, so Profisee is a provider of what's called MDM, Master Data Management Software. We are on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We are a leader in the space. We'll talk a little bit more about what MDM means, but MDM and master data is really the beating heart, as it were, of your data ecosystems. It is a friend of mine would describe it as the nouns that matter to your business. It is things like assets, locations, employees, customers, products, vendors. It's the data that is used widely across the organization and is shared widely across the organization that needs consistent care and feeding. Right? They need consistent definition, structure, quality standards in a way that optimizes and maximizes the use of that data across the entire enterprise, right? So customers is almost always the classic example. Everybody uses it, everybody touches it, everybody's got a say over it. And how do you as an organization get the most value out of that data? By applying consistent data management rules and governance policies to that data. So that's what Profisee does. Profisee provides software that allows companies to scale data management organizations and to allow companies to get the most benefit and the most value out of these shared data assets that we call master data. 3 years previous to joining earlier this spring, I was an analyst at Gartner. So I was given the distinct honor of talking to no fewer than 1,500 CIOs and CDOs day in, day out about what's working, what's not working with data. So many of those conversations were around digital transformation. So many of them were around supply chain optimization, lots of different use cases for how data is leveraged. But the core common theme here being creating this foundation of data through MDM, through data governance, through data quality, and other kind of disciplines in the data management world that allow companies to leverage their data for optimal value. Previous to that, I was a vendor. I worked for a little data provider called Dun & Bradstreet, one of the bigger providers in the kind of B2B data space. I ran an IT organization for a $2 billion publicly traded company. I've implemented data management solutions, been responsible for reporting infrastructures and data quality solutions. I was a consultant for a number of years, started my career working for this little startup called AOL. I had a 10-year long run at AOL in data-centric roles and in product management roles. So I've been around the block. It's crazy to say that I've been doing what I do for almost 30 years. I don't feel as that old, but I guess so. And to the second part of your question, the passion here is that I think a lot of organizations can take data for granted. It's the grist to the mill. It's the fuel to the engine. And it's the engine that really kind of is the sexy part of the business, right? Maybe it's your e-commerce platform, or maybe it's your manufacturing processes, or maybe it's that robot arm that is building something really important in your shop floor. And data, okay, all right. We know it's there. We know it's important, but that's somebody else's job. That's the stuff that I love. And if you don't get data right, if you don't have it figured out, if the foundation of your house is shaky, everything you build on that foundation is going to be equally shaky. And that's the part that makes me want to go to work every day, is helping companies figure that stuff out. Because when it comes to data, there is most certainly a force multiplier at play here, particularly the world that I live in, which is MDM, which is data that is shared widely. So you can think about generating network effects through highly effective data management. That's me. That's what I do. I'm out there evangelizing the benefits of data, a better data management. But my real kind of mission here is to be as a trusted asset online to anybody who has data related challenges.
So that makes sense. And I can tell this by your voice, you are passionate about this, which is awesome. So now most people know that there's tons of data stuck somewhere in their organization, squirreled away in every system they have. How do you define that data quality? What strategy would you use to make sure that you're collecting the data to meet those standards?
Yeah. The problem with data quality at a high level, if you ask somebody, do you want better data? The answer is going to be yes. It's always yes. And like, would you like a hot fudge sundae? Of course I would. Who wouldn't? So I like data quality. It's something that we all aspire to. But the problem with it is that everybody has their own definition. It's highly subjective, right? Data quality to a marketer is totally different than data quality to somebody in compliance, fraud, or legal, or even supply chain or manufacturing or direct procurement. The definitions of quality vary. And this is what makes it so hard. It's another reason why I'm excited to do what I do is because in theory, at the high level, sounds easy. Better data. Let's fix it. In practice, what do you actually do? Because what you're really aiming for here is what in our business, we call fit for purpose. Let's get away from esoteric, ever-changing, squishy definitions of data quality and say, is it good for the purpose that you're trying to do? Is it fit for the purpose of executing a marketing campaign, or is it fit for the purpose of some sort of KYC evaluation, maybe of a new supplier? So data quality definitions will vary across an organization. And figuring out those rules, because sitting underneath it all is still rules, right? How do I define quality? There's attributes of quality. There's accuracy, consistency, timeliness. What are the business rules that define all those things? And people in my world have to figure all of that stuff out. And it gets even harder when there are different rules for different use cases and different purposes. So I wish I had a one size fits all answer here, Michael, that could say, here's what data quality is and here's how you do it. But it's a lot more complicated than that, unfortunately. But again, that's what we're doing down in the engine room, trying to figure this stuff out in the CIO organization so that companies can leverage that data to do what they need to do, to make stuff, to deliver stuff, to procure more stuff. Yeah, it sounds easy, but it's not.
I can imagine. And imagine you have multiple systems, especially when you pull in data that may be fit for one purpose, but is not rich enough. You mentioned this whole KYC thing. Hey, we grabbed a bunch of customer data or customer vendor data, whatever it's going to be, and we have their basic information, which we use all the time for sending them stuff in our marketing campaigns, but it's not good enough to do a credit check on them, right? Or something along those lines. So how do you encourage the organization to be able to leverage a richer set of data when perhaps they haven't thought that through?
Yeah, it's most certainly a balancing act, because when it comes to data, you've got two choices. You can make it accurate at the time of capture, or you can try to fix it after the fact. Those are really the choices. So at the time when I am creating a new supplier record, is the information about that supplier accurate? Is it timely? Is it robust? Is it unique? Or if it's not, maybe I cut some corners. Maybe I inadvertently fat figure something when I'm keying something into a keyboard, right? Doesn't matter. If I don't make it correct at the time of create, it has to happen sometime or another, because if you don't, and that data works its way into business processes, you send the invoice to the wrong place, your goods arrive at the wrong loading bay. Like you've got a pallet worth of stuff sitting somewhere. You don't even know where it is. Downstream impacts of bad data are long. If you try to fix that bad data after the fact, it's going to cost you a lot more money to do it. Not just from the perspective of fixing the record, literally fixing that supplier record, but fixing all of the things that it could potentially impact. Things get exponential quick, right? So companies really do struggle with this to a certain degree because it creates a little bit of a pendulum, right? Because there's a natural stress that exists within all companies between functional units, people doing stuff at relatively low levels of the organization, and higher level needs within kind of the C-suite, right? Where it's like we are functionally aligned because people do different jobs. And there's different processes, right? We have a marketing function versus a procurement function because they're different jobs and the data needs are different. But when you start to roll some of this stuff up to higher levels and you've got C-level people looking at reports and says, wait a minute, why does Acme Incorporated appear 4 times as a supplier across my 4 different locations, across my 4 different plants or shop floors, whatever? We need to fix that. And for obvious reasons, you need to fix that, because knowing that maybe you've got 4 different contracts with that supplier and you should probably really only have one, you can optimize prices. There's a lot of goodness there. But the organization will say, okay, wait a minute. We don't need to allow decentralized management of that data anymore, because that has created bad things. We've got 4 records for the same thing when there should really only be one. Let's shift the pendulum back a little bit and centralize some of that function. And then all of a sudden the people in the operating unit say, wait a minute, I don't have the flexibility that I used to have anymore. And I need that flexibility in order to meet my SLAs or to deliver my goods on time or whatever it is. So there's this kind of natural tension that exists, a bit of a pendulum between centralization of data management processes and decentralization. And it's a real balance. And it really does come down to this kind of centralized top-down, make data correct from day one. And I'm going to put in some draconian, really heavy-handed command and control type approaches to make sure that data is correct from day one, or maybe not. And I just let the business units do whatever they want to do. But then I got to try to fix it after the fact. And it's finding that balance between centralization, decentralization, command and control, and complete autonomy that the companies are consistently forever trying to find.
I know you have multiple systems in multiple locations or multiple business units that leverage the same type of record, understanding which one is the master record. As much as we all like to think there's one source of truth in every organization, the reality is that there's one that most people use, but then there's a lot of other systems that have something that's similar. It could be the same, but we don't know. So that's always a challenge to be able to get that sameness. And again, some of it may have to do with the fit for purpose. Perhaps we have really rich data in our Salesforce, and that's awesome. It's all great there, but we don't leverage Salesforce for doing our shipping or whatever it is, or we don't use Salesforce for doing our marketing campaigns. So we have another database somewhere else that may look similar, but may not be exactly the same.
Yeah. What MDM software does, it tries to solve for the single version of the truth. But to your point, there really isn't. Getting back to my previous comment about fit for purpose, the answer depends on your perspective, right? If you're at a functional level in your marketing versus whatever procurement, then you could have different versions of the truth. And optimally, you probably should have different versions of the truth. One typically tends to be a sell to, and the other one is a deliver to, right? Ship to, buy to, bill to, ship to. Differences in these definitions that naturally exist. But again, at a CEO level or a CFO level, if your CEO asks, how many suppliers do we have or how many customers do we have? There can really only be one answer. There can be one answer. There needs to be. So it's both. A lot of people are quick to say, oh, single version of the truth. That's last decade, right? That's gone. It's dead. Maybe at some levels, if you have what we call the data governance maturity to actually do that, because when you've got different versions of the truth, those are different sets of business rules. And so now in a single version of the truth world, the command and control version of the world, the top down version of the world, you only had one set of business rules. And it was you shall consume these. And this is what it is. And we've got one version of the truth, the one supplier record. It sits in our ERP, and every system downstream of the ERP must consume it. One set of business rules. But then when you have the multiple versions of the truth, that means now you have N versions of these business rules. It can get complicated to maintain and manage over time, and which requires higher levels of what we call data governance maturity, right? That allows that where systems are contextually aware, meaning what's the use of this data? How's it being consumed? Who's looking at this report? How is it created? What's the use case being supported? All great stuff. And we can do that. The technology exists to do all of that today. But do you have the kind of the governance wherewithal to be able to say, okay, these are the business rules for this context, for this use case, and these are the business rules for a different use case? That's the hard part.
Gotcha. So you mentioned one piece that I thought was interesting, and you say, CEOs are seeing 4 different things here on their reports, and they're looking at things, and they got to run a business. They're looking at the broader viewpoint of all these things. How do you get them excited or as passionate as you are to support a data framework that will work for the organization?
This is probably the one lesson here that I've been learning over and over again for the last 30 years is there's a good way to do this, or there's a good way to sell data related initiatives, and there's a bad way to do it. And unfortunately, most companies are doing it the wrong way. Most companies are trying to sell these data initiatives through the lens of better data. And how I know this doesn't work is because I've done it and I've tried and I've failed. What I did is that I was a consultant at the time working for a very large publicly traded company. And I got hired to answer this question, which at the time seemed trivial. I was like, wow, this is going to be easy, but it turned out it was. The question was, how many customers do we have? Right. That was the question. And I needed, as a part of my consulting engagement, there was a due diligence, a discovery, and then phase 2 was to go fix it. Standard kind of consulting engagement. So I was trying to get funding for the phase 2, the fix it. And what I did is that I looked across all this data and I found duplicate records. I found inaccurate records, missing records, malformed fields. I mean, the list of like data crimes was long. And what I did is that I built this, what I thought was a business case. I was wrong. It wasn't a business case, but I thought it was. And I built a business case that said, okay, you've got this many duplicate records today, and we need to fix that. And you've got this many missing fields, and we need to fix that. And all of these data crimes we need to make right. We need to fix all of this stuff. And that's what I thought was the business case, fixing the data. That's the wrong way to sell data projects. The right way to sell this stuff is to take it one step further, to say, okay, we eliminate the duplicate records. What will the business be able to do tomorrow that it cannot do today because of that? An example would be, I gave one earlier, you've got five different agreements with the same supplier. And you're not maybe even aware that you got 5 agreements with the same supplier, or maybe you are, but you've got different terms, whatever it is. Can you maybe lower your supply costs or increase your production output, whatever it is? Can you do that by having a single view of that supplier and a single agreement with that supplier? And if you did, how much money would that actually equal? Right? Hard dollars. That's the business case. That's how you sell better data. You don't sell better data just because the data is cleaner or higher quality. You sell it because it's going to drive business processes and enable higher revenue, lower costs, or reduced risk. One of those 3, if you can quantify that, well, you need to be able to quantify that. That's what you take into the CEO or the CFO to get approval for these programs, not some sort of ill-defined version of better data, whatever that means.
You can only fix things one time to get to a certain point, then something's likely to break again. But if you have a real business value associated with something, then people understand why it's there, not just that it's there, right?
Yep. Exactly right. And this is the number one. People ask me, how do I improve from a data management perspective? What's the one thing that we should be doing differently? What's the one piece of advice that you would give to data leaders? Always, it is find a way to quantify in dollar terms how investments in data will drive tangible business outcomes. That's the answer. It's almost always the answer. Sad part is, Michael, so few companies actually do that. We know when I was at Gartner, we did research survey after research survey that showed time and time again that most companies are not doing that. One of the years that I contributed to a Magic Quadrant document, we did a survey of 400 companies and found that 90% could not quantify their investments in MDM, one subset of data management. So there's a real problem here that companies have in not knowing exactly what a dollar of better data will yield from the perspective of business outcomes.
Gotcha. So you mentioned that there's a lot of tools. Profisee has one, but there's a lot of tools out there to help manage some of the data. We start taking a step back and looking at how humans process things and how, say, a digital worker or RPA processes data through intelligent automation. Is there a way to be able to support better data management, leveraging some sort of automation?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But the automation assumes that you can define all those rules that I was just talking about, right? So I would love there to be a data robot that kind of automated all of the things that I've just been talking about. We're seeing some movement in things like the use of AI and ML to help automate some kind of grassroots data management stuff. There's something in our world we call data stewardship. What that just means is human review. It's not very glamorous, but literally human review of some data elements that our algorithms, our machines couldn't figure out on their own. Like we throw rules at some data, 80% of it, 70, 80% of it, the rules may work, but there's a subset of data that just doesn't because the data is so bad that humans have to get involved. And we're finding some ways by building some better kind of training models for data, maybe even based off of human input, maybe even based off of things like successful transactions or failed transactions, where we can train some models based on a lot of log data that we have about what's working and what's not working. What I'm just describing here is loosely called, there's this trend in the data world called a data fabric, where it's a conceptual model that is early in its life cycle, but where in the future, you could, if you had enough data and if you had enough compute power, you could look at log data, for example. And you could understand when things were successful or not successful, when something worked and when something didn't work. And what were the kind of the data conditions that led to working and what were the data conditions that led to not working? And could you use these large troves of data to help automate some decisions about how we manage data, even how we integrate systems, even how we kind of real-time stream data and insights and analytics into downstream things, including RPA processes? So yes, we can. It's still really early, Michael. A lot of this still at low levels involves some fairly heavy lifting here and often a lot of manual intervention, but we are seeing more things like AI, ML being applied. We're seeing things like graph related technologies, graph databases to help understand complex relationships that may exist. So in your world, it could be conditions that would promote failure, some sort of process. So we're seeing the use of graph and a few other technologies to try to start to understand, okay, wait a minute, these combination of events or these combinations of things could lead to bad outcomes. But frankly, we've got a long way to go before we are fully automated from kind of a data management perspective, but we're working on it.
So you brought up an interesting point, and I want to draw some more out of you on this one. When humans are working on something and we need to process data, we can intuitively look at something and fix it on our own. As you mentioned, bad data coming in, we can process it in our brains and then do something about it at the time. But when you have digital workers working with mass amounts of data, or AI and ML trying to glean insights from the data that's passing through, it can, I would say corrupt, but it certainly can influence the outcomes or the insights that your company is trying to achieve with this bad data. How do you manage for those types of cases?
It's such a great question because for the longest time, where humans were concerned, we knew there was fallibility. Increasingly, we know there's bias. Increasingly, we know there's other factors that are at play here. But for a long time in my world, there's been this belief that all else being equal, humans are the best choice. Meaning if I'm looking at Acme Inc. and Acme Co., right, and I'm looking at these two records, and for whatever reason, our algorithm that try to figure this stuff out, it's called entity resolution, by the way, these algorithms that apply some models to determine if Acme Inc. and Acme Co. are one thing or two things. Let's assume that it can't. That's a bad example because it probably could, but let's assume it can't. And we've long assumed that, oh, okay, we'll kick that over to a human and they will apply their intuition, they will apply their knowledge, and they will apply additional context that they bring to the table that only a human can do that will produce a superior result. That's really been the long held belief in my world, is that all else being equal, for certain use cases, let's take banking, finance, insurance, other regulatory or kind of compliance driven use cases, there is this long held belief that you would never turn that over to the robots, right? That you would always want a human to be doing that because it would produce a superior, more consistent, more accurate result. What we're starting to see is, because of all those things that I talked about, whether it's bias, right? So we can talk about bias and like the ethical AI. It's a huge and growing field, right? Whether it's bias, whether it's fallibility, whether it's a lack of sleep, what we are seeing consistently is that over time, and with enough data, the machines, and I will say robots, can produce an actually better result, and most certainly a better result at scale, right? So if you are trying to solve for understanding the global movement of people or goods or shipping containers or anything where you're talking millions, if not billions of transactions per day, applying some of the things that I was talking about, you can't do it with humans anymore. Even you just can't. Early on, maybe 5-10 years ago, we saw some things like high profile people like politicians getting added to no-fly lists. And you would always hear about some of these edge cases where the AI failed. But increasingly, I think these things are getting better. And to operate at scale, we're having to acknowledge that, hey, we need to rely on AI for this stuff because we can't scale if we're going to throw human beings into this workflow. It's just not going to work.
That does resonate because we've seen that either you hire an army of people to do it or you hire an army of digital workers to do it. But either way, you need an army of something to be able to handle the volumes that are coming through. And I guess the better part about having maybe a digital worker do this is, as they process some things, there's a digital exhaust that can be captured. So the data, the metadata, the data about the data, that will maybe give you some insights on how things are working from an organizational standpoint, but also some insights about your customers that you may not be able to see if you simply just process the data.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. That data exhaust for a lot of companies is sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah.
Like where the insights that you could produce may not even be your core business, but could be incredibly valuable. I would argue that some sectors have figured this out, financial services, maybe even retail to a certain degree, where the buying behaviors and buying patterns, I guess maybe we could pick on Amazon on this one. Their core business is selling stuff, but the information that they have now about buyer behaviors and demographics and behaviors, it's mind boggling. That's the example of the exhaust that you gave out. In my world, kind of data monetization, data as a product is very sexy right now. And a lot of companies are looking at it. The core challenge though, for a lot of these companies is that's not their core business. It's not what they do, right? They make things, they make widgets. They're not a data company, and making and selling and distributing and marketing data is a very, very different thing than making widgets. And a lot of companies are struggling with this. Maybe they'll even go hire a CDO to try to figure it all out. But at the end of the day, it can be a real struggle for a lot of companies. So we're seeing more and more what are called data marketplaces. More and more companies are trying to monetize their data. Sounds great. Can you turn this cost center into a profit center? Man, that would be awesome. But it is what we're talking about for a lot of big companies here is a completely new kind of way of working that often is totally different than what their core competencies are.
Another good point you brought up, and this is something that I wanted to get to, and this is a good time to bring it up. But you mentioned organizations that are not necessarily data driven right now have probably a lot of people who aren't data driven also. So how does the average employee contribute to help create a data driven organization, especially if they're not a data scientist themselves?
Yeah, there's no easy answer here. It really starts from the top down though. And I know this is going to sound trivial and maybe a little trite, but becoming data driven, some people in my world that think that's not a good term. I think it's a great term. I think we should be more data driven. We get hung up on, should it be data driven or data informed or data enabled? I don't care. Everybody understands kind of what data driven means. It needs to start from the top, right? And you need to have senior executive buy-in around becoming more data driven. But the best way for that employee to become more data driven is for somebody in the senior level to tell a data story about how data will make their job easier, or make it so that they get a bonus next year, or so that they hit their SLA in a way that doesn't actually maybe even use the word data. Right? Can you tell a data story? Can you create a narrative at multiple levels of the organization? This isn't just for the line worker who is trying to do his or her job, but it's also for the senior directors and the VPs and even the C-level, right? You need to establish narratives at each of those levels that make a connection between making my job easier, delivering an exceptional customer experience, or driving my inventories down, or procuring goods faster, or having a diverse and robust supply chain. Whatever it is that you're doing for the organization, that data story needs to tie to that. To me, that's the foundation. People need to know how data can impact their work and make their lives easier and make their jobs easier. That's the foundation. And if you can't tell that story, and if you can't establish that foundation, you're going to be dead in the water, because it's just going to sound a little lip servicey. And it's the thing that shows up on the 4th or 5th page of the PowerPoint that's shared at the all hands. But if I don't know how it relates to me in what I'm doing all day, every day, whatever, man, I got a job.
Yeah.
So understand that. To me, that's the foundation. And we can go on from there. We can talk about the importance of hiring data professionals. I would argue the importance of hiring a chief data officer to be beating this drum. I would argue about the importance of data storytelling. There's this thing called data literacy in my world. I hate the term data literacy, but it really speaks to training, helping people understand how data can make their lives easier. It even gets into things like building data-related products and exposing data at the right data at the right time for the right people and the right tool. All of these things come together for making organizations more data-driven. But ultimately, I would argue is that you become data-driven, but the nirvana here is you don't even know it. So just start, I would say job number one for a lot of companies, go hire a CDO, go hire a data storyteller, go hire a champion that is really pushing from the top down all the things that I just talked about. And it's going to be a multi-year long thing. Just is, because ultimately we're talking about culture And you cannot pivot the culture of an organization in 6 weeks, right? It's going to be years, but there are baby steps that you can take along the way. And those are some of the things that I used to consult to organizations when I was a Gartner analyst.
That makes sense. Talked about jobs, talked about the role of the CDO, the chief data officer, because CDO can also mean chief digital officer in our world. So when you start looking at the things, I can feel your passion for all of this. But what inspires you?
What really inspires me is solving really hard things that other people can't.
Okay.
Maybe there's a little bit of ego in there. I suspect there probably is, but I'm inspired and I'm motivated by the paradox that lives and breathes within the data organizations of most companies. Getting back to this idea that on the surface, it sounds easy, but when you peel the onion, it's not. Right. And I'm the guy that's going to be running towards the burning, not to say that I am equal when it comes from a braver perspective. This is a metaphor, not a physical thing. There are people that actually literally do run into burning buildings, or that go fight our wars, that do other things far more heroic than I would ever have the willpower to do. But metaphorically, when it comes to data and some of these challenges that an organization has, that's what I love to do. I love to run into the burning building to try to figure out, okay, wait a minute. I've seen this before. I know what worked. I know what doesn't work. Been around the block. I can help you do that. That's what gets me up every morning, as it were, because a lot of companies are running away from their problems when it comes to this and love running towards it.
Gotcha. More personal question. If I were to look on your nightstand right now, what book would I find there?
You would find a book called The Changing World Order by a guy named Ray Dalio, he runs the world's largest hedge fund, super smart guy, where it's a book that he wrote where he's talking about the rise and fall of empires. So that's the book that's on my night table. The one that was read before this was called The End of the World. Oh my gosh. The End of the World is just the beginning. It was by a guy named Peter Zeihan, Zeihan. He's a demographer, but the book is really all about collapse of global interconnectedness from a supply chain perspective and the end of globalization writ large, and how more and more we're going to see more onshoring of manufacturing processes and other things because of kind of tectonic shifts that are happening in the world that he would argue are largely a result of demographic changes, but also changes in a few other things. That's what I'm reading right now.
Gotcha. Very macro-based worldview kind of books. That's
both.
It's kind of heavy stuff for just putting you to sleep at night.
Tell me about it, especially when I'm typically up around 5:30 or 6 every morning. My wife and I walk, we live in Florida here. We're lucky enough to walk on the beach every morning. So by 9:15, I'm just, and some of these books are pretty thick. I'm getting through 1 or 2 pages before I'm passing out every night, but still good stuff.
Malcolm, it was great to have you on the show and to talk through how organizations really need to refocus their efforts to be able to leverage the data they have and do it the right way with the top-down view of approaching this. So I really appreciate your insights today.
Good stuff. Thank you so much, Michael. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.